Let's go.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Purposeful Armament, and today we're going to be doing a video that is kind of a first for us. We're going to be looking at a legitimate Amazon optic, and eventually we're going to compare it against other more mainstream optics to see how it stacks up in terms of performance and capabilities. Now, this first video is going to be just a basic overview, sort of a first look video, if you will. We'll follow it up with a full review and torture test of this optic. Now, for full transparency, Cyelee is the manufacturer. They reached out to us and wanted to send us this optic, the Wolf 2, free of charge. They told us to test it. They told us to even do a torture test. They wanted to make sure everything remained completely objective. So we did not take money in any way for a positive review of this optic. We are going to be incredibly harsh to it, and I will give you my full thoughts on it. So if this optic sucks, I'm gonna say it sucks. If it fits a certain niche, I'll say it fits a certain niche, and you guys might be a little bit surprised on my hot take on these type of optics, which we'll talk about in a later video. So stay tuned for that, it's gonna be spicy. Cyelee did also offer us a link, which will be in the description, as well as a discount code for 15% off of the optic if you purchase it. I'll put the code in the description. I'm not gonna put it on screen because I think that you guys should watch this video all the way through and maybe even wait for our full review and torture test in the future before you go ahead and buy this optic. So for this first impressions video, I'm gonna tell you guys about my initial impressions of the optic, as well as some of the features that Cyelee claims, which we will test in our upcoming video. So first off, I want to kind of talk about the box real quick, which actually is better than I thought it was going to be. Now, there is a lot of text and display pictures on the sides of this box, which make it a bit overwhelming, but all in all, not terrible. But of course, inside is what actually matters. So you get a nice little microfiber cloth. You get a bunch of just kind of BS informational forms. Now, inside the actual box itself, I'll put some B-roll up. I have my HoloSun in there right now, but you get some additional hardware, which is a nice touch for something that's coming from Amazon. And you have some nice padding, as well as a nice little plate to attach it to a Picatinny rail. So we will be attaching this to an AR-15 as well as a SCAR in the future, specifically for our torture test. And inside the box, you do get a little tool to actually make the adjustments. It's kind of hard to do without this little tool, so you definitely really need this or a very small screwdriver. So at least with initial impressions, I want to give props to Cyelee for making sure that their packaging is decent. Now let's talk about some of the features of this red dot, of which there are a handful they market pretty heavily. Number one, this red dot is on an RMR footprint. I would say that's a pretty good plus. That's a very normal, typical footprint to have a red dot on. Number two, they claim true daylight bright. Number three, their reticle. They have a 3 MOA dot in the center of a larger 64 MOA circle. Number four, they have a motion detecting shake awake feature. Number five is actually really interesting. They have an astigmatism relief system. We'll talk about that later. Number six is obviously the waterproofing, which we've already seen. They actually gave a waterproofing rating, which is I've never seen before. And number seven, they claim 50,000 hours of battery life. And without further ado, here it is, the actual Wolf 2. I'll get up here so you guys can see it a little bit better. We'll take some B-roll, of course. This optic is actually better than I was expecting. A lot of people think Amazon optic, and they think something that is sold for airsoft guns that people buy and put on their real firearms. And that is honestly what I thought about this too. I was nervous, to say the least, but this optic showed up and it actually is pretty decent. It is metal, which is good. I think it looks okay. It's not incredibly ugly. I don't feel any specific type of way about it. It looks all right to me. There are two buttons on it, and the buttons feel tactile. I mean, they have a nice click to them. You can definitely tell whenever you've pressed them. Like I said in the past, I have bought some Amazon optics, and that is typically one of the things that is really a shortcoming on those optics because they're so cheap. Number one, the materials feel horrible, and number two, the buttons also feel terrible. They're just mushy, and you can't really tell if they were pressed or not. But these have a nice little click to them. You can definitely tell that you're actually doing something to the optic, which is definitely a good plus. And like I mentioned, the buttons are nice and big, so you don't have the accidental fat fingering like I sometimes do on my HoloSun. The glass looks fairly clear. There's not really a whole lot of tint to it. It looks very true to what the color actually is. The really only downside I can think of right now in this first impression are the clicks on the adjustments. They feel a little mushy, kind of hard to tell whenever you're actually hitting a click, but sometimes they're also very loud and very pertinent, and you can definitely feel the actual physical click. So I'm not sure what that's all about, but that's at least what I'm experiencing with this. It's nothing that's going to be inhibiting you from being able to zero this red dot, but it is kind of annoying. So far, I've put about 150 to like 170 or so rounds through it, and I haven't really experienced any issues actually. Typically with very cheap red dot sights, you would see some sort of zero shift or some sort of problem with the optic, but that doesn't seem to be the case, at least right now. And we saw absolutely no zero shift yet in this optic. Now, I understand we're only 200 rounds in, but that's still pretty good for a cheap Amazon optic. And I didn't do anything crazy like dropping it from shoulder height or anything. That will come later. I did do a few racks off of the red dot sight on a bench a couple of times, and it didn't have any effect on the zero whatsoever. Now, the illumination is pretty good, as you're probably seeing in these clips. Most of them are taking place on very, very sunny days, and I have no problem with the illumination on the dot at all. Now, it is worth mentioning that compared to the HoloSun 507C, which is what I typically run on this handgun, this dot is not quite as bright. It's just won't get as bright. It's bright enough to use during the daylight. It's plenty bright for that, but it doesn't get quite as bright. Now, the astigmatism relief system, which is on this optic, is something very interesting to me because I happen to have an astigmatism. And for me, if you're not familiar with what an astigmatism is, just look up a picture of what someone sees with an astigmatism. There's definitely kind of a spectrum. It's not, some people don't have it as bad as other people. Mine isn't terrible, so for me, I can make do with a HoloSun or really any red dot. It's not really a huge issue. This reticle is actually much cleaner and much crisper to my eyes than my HoloSun is. Even with my HoloSun being on just the dot or being on the circle dot, which is more accurate to what this reticle is, this one is still far crisper than my HoloSun. Now, I honestly thought it would be some weird marketing gimmick because this optic is only like $110 or something like that, but it actually surprisingly works. With that being said, I'll talk about the reticle a little bit because the circle dot is kind of a love or hate relationship among people who use red dots. I personally have always used the circle dot on my HoloSun, and the reason why is because my astigmatism. Just a standard red dot looks pretty bad with my astigmatism. It has a very large starburst effect. So I would typically run the circle dot, which doesn't feel as starbursty for whatever reason. With this, I wish that they had another reticle option of having just a single dot, because that would be fantastic. Now, the circle dot I do find is easier to pick up whenever you're trying to go very fast because you can pick up the actual reticle easier than just a single dot. That I feel like is kind of a shortcoming of this optic because it doesn't offer any other reticle options. It just has that circle dot. So let's look at the overall pros of this bad boy. First off is going to be that astigmatism relief. For anyone with an astigmatism, this is going to look crisper. I tested it with Brandon, who has a much worse astigmatism than me, and he found the reticle very, very crisp as well. So that's a huge plus for the optic thus far. Number two is going to be that shake awake feature. That's going to help to reduce your battery consumption. Now, I did test this. I just laid the gun down, and after about 5 minutes, the dot went off. I could physically see the illuminator in the back. You might be able to see it on camera. I could physically see the illuminator in the back shut off. So I knew that the shake awake feature was working, and as soon as I picked up the gun, that dot was back on and ready to go. Shake awake feature is awesome because I have a tendency to forget to turn my red dot sights off after I'm leaving the range, which causes me to drain a lot of extra battery life that I really don't need to drain. So this is much better on your batteries having a shake awake feature. It also just allows you to leave the optic always on, so you always know it's going to be ready whenever you go to pick it up. And finally, the third pro is the cost. Like I said, these are very, very cheap optics. That can be great if you're just trying to outfit a gun with a cheap optic so that you can use it at the range. I don't know that I would necessarily consider this to be a good option for concealed carry or any like duty use, but it works as a sighting system for a gun if you're just taking it to the range. Let's get into the cons. There are a few of them. Number one con is the reticle option. There's only one reticle option and you can't switch it. The circle dot is fine. I like it. It's what I've always used, but something like a hollow sun, which is going to be just a little bit more expensive than this, you would get 3 different reticle options if you so choose. And another downside of that circle dot is whenever you're shooting at longer ranges, the reticle just becomes very, very busy. There's a lot of reticle and it can be kind of hard to see your target. Now, how often are you going to be shooting your pistol at 75 to 100 yards? Probably not super often, but that is something to note. The second con is the reticle kind of fills the entire window of the optic. Now this is kind of hard to demonstrate and explain because of how cameras interact with optics like this, but believe me whenever I say it, the entire window is taken up by the reticle. If you're not 100% perfectly looking through that window and you have it up, down, left to right, well, left to right's a little bit different, it's wider, but if you have it up even just a little bit or down even just a little bit, you're gonna be cutting off some of your optic. There really is no wiggle room with up and down. Left to right is fine because it's a little bit wider, like I said, but that up and down is very, very cramped. And of course, number 3, something I've been harping on throughout all of this first impression video, is the reliability. I'm just not sure about it yet. This is a fairly new brand to me at least. I'm not sure how reliable this is going to be. I could eat my words, it could be extremely reliable, it could even be the most reliable red dot, but something tells me that probably isn't the case. Which is why we're going to be doing a torture test and full review video in the coming months. So be sure to stay tuned for all of our content coming out about this optic if you are at all interested. I think it'll be a good video, even if you're not going to buy a cheap optic like this, it'll be kind of good to see what different price points can get you. We're going to be testing pretty much all of their claims. We're going to be doing some pretty wild stuff with it to see if it'll break. It should be a fun time. I will have a link to this optic in the description if you would like to check it out, and you can use the discount code if you are interested in purchasing. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Cyelee, for sending this optic out to us, and I will see you in the next video and in the coming review videos of this optic. Remember, stay armed. So I still suck at the Modern Samurai Project, Course of Fire, but this is clean. Everything is in the A zone. Everything is in the A of the head. I mean, it's pretty good. Just if it was quicker, it'd be way better, but 2 A zones, 13 hits.